Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of the Open Road Tour. I'm Danny.
And I'm Kerry.
And this is our 2004 Seal Grey Porsche Boxster that we picked up just before the beginning of the global virus pandemic.
And once lockdown was in place, we really didn't have an opportunity to put it through its paces.
Given that we had to postpone our summer holiday until the lockdown was over, we thought, what better way to do it than to drive it here, the extremely pleasant southwest of France.
And better still, we thought, why not film it as the ultimate road test?
So that's exactly what we did.
We first visited the southwest of France with our first sports car, which was a 2-litre Alfa GTV, and we drove it here way back in December 2008. Since then, we've pretty much been coming back here every year, so certain places have definitely become a bit of a home from home.
There's also plenty of great places to explore. So what could be a more fitting destination for our first ever tour? A 1,700-mile round trip from our hometown in Reading, travelling the length of France and visiting some of our favourite spots and some iconic locations along the way. It's way too early in the morning for this. We're in the car. We've got about 2 hours to get to Folkestone for our train, but we've decided to leave a little bit early because given the current situation, we don't know how it's going to go with delays, so we don't want to miss our train. But to make this a scientific experiment, we have to reset the trip meter so that we can keep an eye on our miles and our fuel economy. So we'll do that right now. And there we go. So, full tank of fuel, check. Anti-pandemic wear,
Check.
sunglasses, check. Let's go. The first leg of our tour is a 100-mile blast from our home base in Reading, traversing the M25 around the outskirts of Greater London and down to the train terminal in Folkestone for the Channel crossing to Calais. The first thing you'll probably notice about the Boxster is the level of noise inside the cabin compared to your average family car. I mean, the engine is literally here, right behind your seat, which means it's a much more visceral experience. And you tend to hear a few things that you probably wouldn't normally hear in a normal front engine vehicle. That's not to say it's overly loud. I mean, it is a sports car after all, and it's sort of the point. The interesting thing is that if you have the optional Bose stereo, not only does it change the in-car volume, but it analyzes the sound and adjusts the output so it's still perfectly balanced. Just what you need for a motorway blast. Well, we're on the train and we're on our way. As we're going into Europe, we've got a couple of things we need to do before we get there. Namely, that is changing the speedo into kilometres and moving the clock forward an hour for Central European summertime. Now, this Boxster doesn't have kilometres on the actual analogue dial, but there is a digital readout which you can change to kilometres via the control stick. You can also do the time that way, but there's also a cool little function up here where you can set the time, either just the hours or the minutes, either forwards and backwards, which makes life a little bit easier. So we'll go ahead and do that, and we'll be good.
Our channel crossing done, the road trip really begins. But given that we've been on the go since silly o'clock this morning, we definitely need a coffee and something to eat before we start doing some serious distance.
Time for some breakfast.
So I'm sure everyone recognises the building that's behind me. It is, of course, a motorway service station. They're dotted all along the main roads through the UK and throughout Europe. But, you know, that wasn't always the case. In fact, if you'd have been driving in your original Porsche 356, or say you're Steve McQueen in your 911S on the way to the Le Mans circuit, you would have needed one of these, the Michelin Guidebook. Before the age of sat-nav, the internet, and of course motorway service stations, this Michelin Guide was the book du jour for getting you from A to B. So very handily for the hungry traveller, the Michelin Guide also rated restaurants, and it gave them either no stars to 3 stars. Obviously 3 stars would have been the more expensive, the more salubrious end of the scale, but it was designed to help you understand where you could go and get a good feed, basically. And of course, this then became the forerunner for what we recognise today as the Michelin star. So we're using the 1952 Michelin Guide for our trip, and that comes just 4 years after the first Porsche production cars came off the line. So it's very possible that this book had pride of place in one of those early cars.
So, all refueled, ready to go. Let's get back on the motorway and do some distance. Back on the motorway, it was time to make the most of the higher 130km speed limit and open up the throttle for the 130-mile run from Calais down to our first stop, Rouen.
Punch it, Chewy.
Nothing says France like wine, cheese, and toll roads. In fact, all of Western Europe seems to have a love affair with a toll booth. Love them or hate them, I guess it does mean that the roads generally are in good condition. But on a long trip like this, the cost does tend to mount up. Of course, having a right-hand drive car in Europe does pose a few other problems, namely, everything's on the wrong side of the car. This means that if you do end up having to pay the tolls and you don't have a glamorous assistant like I happen to have here, you end up having to do the dash of shame. Basically, run around the car, pay your toll, and then run back. Of course, you've got to do all that before the toll gate lifts and it doesn't close again.